Chapter 20. The Opium. Next morning brought a cheerless breakfast on the remains of last night's fish and potatoes, yet everything was the same, the island and everything on it, the sky and the sea. Another day had come with the same sun and life and hope. All should have been as cheery as yesterday. The passing of a steamer in the night had made the whole world miserable, my world. The tide came lapping over the reef with hardly a ripple, and on it something came floating gently in. I had not noticed it, being wretchedly occupied in being miserable. That floating thing looked like a piece of seaweed some floating weed had caught upon it. Suddenly I remembered last night, and hurried down to the water's edge. The flotsam came nearer. It bore the tiniest of mastheads, upon which was furled a wee flag. If there had been the faintest breeze, the flag would have been bravely fluttering. It was the opium tin brought back by the returning tide. I waded out, tingling with curiosity, though wary of sharks. The tin came drifting sluggishly closer with a decided list to port. At last I grasped it, a watertight kerosene tin it appeared to be at first sight, but it was actually larger, supporting a clever topmast of wire built just like those still trellis masts on some American battleships. This mast rose 2 feet above the tin, and right at the top was this neat little flash lamp. Something had gone wrong with the mechanism, for the lamp was out, or else the clockwork was regulated so cleverly that the light would flash only at night. Above the mast projected a tiny wooden flagpole. That tiny flag on a calm sea would be visible quite a distance to a man with glasses searching for it from the masthead of a lugger. Sitting on the reef, I admired the thing, delaying to break it open. No doubt as to what was inside, for it was known in Cooktown and farther south in Cairns that opium was constantly thrown overboard that way, from China boats steaming down the coast. I thought of Charlie and glanced along the reef. The tide was coming in, but it was still possible to splash along the reef right to his camp. I hurried. This was too great a treat to keep from Charlie. We would spend days gloating over this visitation. It would supply an entire change in conversation, a new mutual interest, if only he was not in one of his bad moods. Nearly so. He was sitting morosely by the fire. "What do you think of this?" I shouted. He stared. Then his face showed interest. He reached out for the tin. "Where did you get it?" he growled pleasantly. "It came floating in with the tide. Must have been thrown overboard from the China boat last night." "That's what I thought. Did you see the steamer?" "No, I heard her engines. How shrewd these chaps are. See how cleverly this is built, that signal flag of yours." He glanced up sharply. "What about it? Pull it down." He stood up, his face eager, his eyes fairly dancing. "Why pull it down? Don't you understand? This calm has delayed some lugger from being on time to pick up the tin. No doubt she should have been lying off Coquet last night. She can't be far away. She'll see your flag and search the island. Then she'll pick us up." Thank heaven I had not thought of that. Pick us up, be damned. Do you imagine opium smugglers would pick us up? They are more likely to give us a bullet for interfering in their business. See this." He ripped the tomahawk into the tin and split it open, disclosing tight-packed tins inside. "See," he pointed triumphantly. He ripped aside from the container and poured out the tins, 144 of them. "There you are. When we left Cooktown, a tin of this brand was worth 20 anywhere in Chinatown. That's 2,880 worth of opium lying there. Do you think a crew of Asiatics are going to let us get away with that?" I stared at him. "Pull down the flag," he almost entreated, "and all they will want is their opium. The last thing in the world they would do would be to take us off this island if we gave them back their opium. Don't you realize they'd know we would put the show away when they landed us at Cooktown, and that the customs men would be hiding off Coquet waiting for them the very next time a China boat was due to pass by?" The smugglers would be forced to find a new rendezvous. It would put their organization all out of plumb. If they find out we've got this opium, their object will be to silence us, not to take us off and let us advertise their plant. But this is Australia, I protested. They don't do anything to us. If they were uneasy about landing us at Cooktown, they'd simply take us off and land us anywhere on the mainland and be only too glad that they'd recovered their opium. Australia be damned, this is a lonely island on one of the loneliest coastlines in the world. Who sails these waters? A very occasional steamer going to China or Darwin. Who else? Quite a lot of purling luggers and bêche de mer cutters manned by Asiatics. No one else. This is their coast while they sail it. To them we are two unknown white foreigners entirely cut off from the world, and we've not only taken possession of nearly 3,000 worth of their opium, but we've spoiled the secrecy of their receiving base, and we are in a position to put them away to the customs officials down south. Bah, they'll shut our mouths once for all. We'll never leave the island unless it's with a stone around our necks over the edge of the reef. Pull down that flag before it's too late. He was a different Charlie. Years had dropped from him, and he meant every eager word he said. All right, I agreed, and started running back along the track to pull down the signal pole. Bank your fire so that no smoke can show, yelled Charlie. And don't leave anything lying about. There was nothing much to leave lying about. The camp of an aboriginal could hardly have been more primitive. When I returned to Charlie, we climbed stealthily up the peak, he taking the lead, eager as a schoolboy. I hardly knew the man. There was no sail in sight. Eagerly we scanned the sea all around. No sign of her, I said in disappointment. Don't be too sure. Don't show yourself on the skyline. You look like a beacon to a vessel out there. She may be lying behind Coquet, or she may be close to the mangroves away behind our island. We wouldn't see her there, while she kept in close to the trees. Charlie was all on the gaze, eager to talk. We debated the pros and cons for quite a while. Then suddenly Charlie exclaimed, "Look, here she comes. Keep down, out of sight." I gazed around where his hand pointed, then crouched low. Around the shore edge of the peak, away below, a dinghy appeared. The colored crew strained at the oars. Then another and another, pulling hard as they slowly towed a rakish-looking bêche de mer cutter. Black-painted, a speedy-looking vessel. A Japanese steered her. Several men stood at bow, and stern, while one at the masthead was examining the calm waters through field glasses. "Don't show yourself," cautioned Charlie. "They'll concentrate on the shoreline, but they might glance up here now and again. On a bright day like this, they'd spot the top of your head against the skyline." Above all things in the world, that was the very thing I had wished these months past. I lay there wondering at Charlie, wondering at myself for not standing erect and yelling. If we gave them their own opium, it seemed a cheap price to pay for a passage back to civilization. But Charlie's reasoning seemed grimly sound. Dead men tell no tales did not appear melodramatic under the circumstances. Those men down there were engaged in illegal smuggling for big prizes. They were aliens who put quite a different price on morals and life, especially foreign life. If we walked to the shore and gave them the opium, they could easily take us aboard, learn our story, and drop us overboard any night. If they didn't, they would not dare to meet steamers here again. All their system would be disorganized. They would have to advise headquarters in Hong Kong or Shanghai and reorganize their system entirely. And the heads would not relish the trouble and danger and expense of that. The longer I thought of it, the more Charlie's reasoning rang true. "They'll be angry men," said Charlie. "They only missed that China boat by hours, and now they've lost over 2,000 worth of opium, all for the need of a puff of wind. Their skipper will get canned over the knuckles for this, and the crew will lose their prize money. Yes, and be mad about it too. It's a wonder we have not noticed the black cutter before. Is Coquet Light their regular rendezvous, I wonder? They'd lie in behind Cape Melville by day, and sail for Coquet by dark. They'd pick up the tin and be away in the dark before dawn. No stray pearling vessels would notice them hanging about then. I suppose they get rid of the stuff through Cooktown or Cairns. Yes, Semple, sail into Cooktown with a cargo of Esh de Mer, sell it to the Chinese merchants and sell the opium at the same time, or make their selling port farther south at Cairns or Townsville. They've got legitimate business in all three ports. Sometimes they don't sail into the port with the stuff, but approach by night, then sail into the coast at an agreed-on spot where an agent is waiting. They land the stuff, and he takes it overland in perfect safety. They stand offshore, then sail into port in daytime, and all the custom officers in the world could search their boat and not find a solitary tin of opium. By Jove, what? They must know we are here. They must have seen the signal flag. It's visible miles out to sea. Out to sea, yes, chuckled Charlie, but not close up against the mangroves away around the island. They've drifted all night, have been pulling for hours, maybe hugging the mangrove edge all the closer towards dawn. They'd take no more risk than they had to. They came from around behind the hill, remember, and we had that flag down soon after dawn. No, if they had seen it, they'd have landed here already. Slowly the black cutter neared Coquet Island. The anchor splashed down, the chain rattled musically across the water. The lookout man remained at the masthead, while other Japanese took command of the dinghies, which scattered, rowing closely around the shore. They'll examine every yard of the shore around Coquet, said Charlie, then come here and row along the reef and around the island. They won't see my camp, for it is sheltered not only by mangroves but by the lagoon and reef. They'll keep to the reef edge and won't come within hundreds of yards of the camp. The mound will have no attraction for them. It's only the shoreline they'll be interested in. Sure, you've left nothing lying about, no crab shells or fish bones down near the reef. Nothing, and there are no tracks because the tide washes them out. The only tracks are at the well, which they can't see. They'd see your track from the camp to the well if they came inland. They won't do that, said Charlie, not unless they're short of water and happen to know of the well, which isn't likely. If so, and they search inland, we must take to the mangroves. Why, we could easily bluff it out. They don't know that we have found the opium. Then why are we hiding here? I glanced at Charlie, then across at the cutter. Of course they would know. If we knew nothing of the opium, we should have been standing plainly on the peak long ago. Two lonely men on a barren island do not let such a chance of a talk in fresh doors go by unless they have some good reason for doing so. I realized that this exciting interlude might possibly lead to unpleasant adventure. How shrewd Charlie was, and what a different man. If they forced us to take to the mangroves, I said slowly, we'd be in desperate plight. They'd only have to camp by the hill, the peak, and the mound. The tide must drive us out of the mangroves. What then? They'd have to split up their small forces and post them in three places. Several at the hill, several at the peak, several at the mound, and 3 men at least would have to stay aboard the cutter. Where would the men be to catch us when and if we came from the mangroves? 2 spare men at the very most. Well, we are 2 men. Besides, we know the mangroves, they don't. They would be like fish out of water, and how would those 2 men know where to wait for us? We would have all the cover, they would have none. We could come out of the mangroves wherever we liked, so long as it was on the hill or peak side. Then again, if they posted 2 men to watch the mound, we could come out of the mangroves anywhere, around the mound, or tackle them by surprise. Water. How did you ensure your water supply through so far from the well? How indeed. Then we'd have our spears to get us food, and we'd carry fire sticks, added Charlie. If it does work out that way, we're in for an interesting time. We are. You've wanted something to break the monotony, now you've got it, or we'll have if they discover there are 2 white men on this island. Perhaps it was this same change in the monotony, with its chance of lively times to come, that had so changed Charlie. No one could have wished for a better mate when he was like this. I felt the reaction too, while peering out across the channel at the black cutter, almost wishing that they would discover our presence and investigate. If they do come, I said eagerly, they must row ashore in a dinghy. If they chased us about the island, they would not have nearly enough men to watch the peak, the hill, the mound, the mangroves, the cutter, and the dinghy. They'd certainly leave it unguarded. If our position became desperate, we could sneak on the dinghy at night, row across to the cutter, and try to seize her. That's the last thing they would expect. Why shouldn't we seize her? Growled Charlie. We'd be masters of the situation then. We could sail the vessel away and keep her or sell her. They daren't say a word. They couldn't anyway. We'd be away and they'd be here. I whistled. Charlie somehow took my breath away.